Alan and Marissa thought they were building a future together, saving every penny for their dream life. But just as everything seemed within reach, Marissa vanished without a trace, taking all their money and leaving Alan with nothing but questions. What secrets was she hiding? And how far would she go to disappear for good? Alan Clark had never been a dreamer. He was the kind of man who found comfort in routines, who took pride in showing up on time and doing his job well. For more than a decade, he worked at the same auto repair shop in Portland, Oregon, changing tires, fixing engines, and quietly stashing away every extra dollar he earned. His wife, Marissa, was different. She had a spark, a kind of quiet energy that drew people in. She worked as a dental assistant at a small clinic downtown. Together, they made an unlikely but solid pair, him grounded, her hopeful. And over time, that hope became a plan. They wanted out of the city, the noise, the rent, the traffic. It wore them down. It wasn't a sudden decision. The idea of moving somewhere quieter, starting fresh, had been planted years ago during a weekend trip to Idaho. They'd stumbled upon a small farming town nestled between pine-covered hills, where the air smelled like grass and the nights were silent. They'd walked down its single main street, past an old diner and a shuttered general store, and both felt something they hadn't in years: peace. It started with little changes. They stopped eating out, stopped upgrading their phones. They sold Marissa's car and began carpooling to work. She took on extra shifts. He worked weekends. They lived simply and quietly, focused on one thing: saving. Every month, they transferred money into a joint savings account they opened just for this purpose. They even kept a spreadsheet, color-coded and carefully maintained by Marissa, tracking every expense, every deposit, every goal reached. Alan would sometimes look at that spreadsheet late at night, marveling at how far they'd come. It was more than money. It was proof they were moving toward something better. Their goal was $150,000. It would cover the down payment on a piece of land, a modest house, and the costs of relocating. They dreamed of raising chickens, maybe a few goats. Marissa talked about starting a garden. Alan imagined setting up a workshop behind the house, fixing tractors instead of sedans. By the end of the 5th year, they were almost there, just $2,000 shy of their goal. They found a listing for a farmhouse in Bonners Ferry, Idaho. 2 bedrooms, 5 acres, and a small barn. It was everything they had hoped for. The plan was to drive out the following month, tour the property, and put in an offer. For Alan, it felt like the beginning of their real life. All the years of sacrifice were about to pay off. There were no signs anything was wrong. In fact, those final weeks were filled with excitement. Marissa printed pictures of the farmhouse and taped them to the fridge. She started packing boxes with books and kitchenware. Alan joked about how he'd never touch a city bus again once they moved. They both laughed at how hard they had worked to become invisible in Portland, only to become dreamers once again in a forgotten corner of Idaho. Then, one morning, everything changed. It was a Thursday in late April. Alan had worked a late shift and slept in. He woke up to silence. Not unusual, since Marissa sometimes left early for work. But the house felt empty. Not just quiet. Empty. The coffee pot was cold. The curtains were drawn. Her shoes were missing from the rack by the door. At first, he wasn't worried. Maybe she had gone to run errands. Maybe there was an early dental conference she forgot to mention. But hours passed. He called her cell, straight to voicemail. He texted. No reply. He tried the clinic. They said she hadn't shown up. She hadn't called in sick either. That's when the panic set in. Alan tore through the apartment, calling her name as if she might be hiding. He opened drawers. Some were empty. Her favorite jacket was gone. Her phone charger. Her makeup bag. Then, with trembling hands, he sat down at the computer and logged into their joint savings account. The balance read 0.0. It didn't make sense. He checked again. Then again. It wasn't a glitch. The entire balance, $148,000, had been withdrawn. His chest tightened. His vision blurred. For a moment he couldn't move. He called the bank. They confirmed it had been transferred in full, just after midnight, to an external account he didn't recognize. The account had been set up online using both their names. Security footage from the ATM outside their bank showed Marissa withdrawing. A few hundred in cash at 7:18 that morning. Alone, calm, dressed in jeans and a gray hoodie. There was no note. No message. No warning. Marissa Clark had simply vanished. Alan reported her missing that evening. The police came, asked questions, took down details. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of forced entry. She hadn't taken much, just a single suitcase, her ID, and the money. They treated it as a voluntary disappearance. As far as they could tell, she wasn't in danger. She had just left. But to Alan, it made no sense. They had worked too hard, too long for her to give up. Now, he scoured her things, looking for clues. Her emails, her texts, her notebooks. Everything seemed normal, until he noticed a locked folder on her laptop labeled taxes. When he finally got it open, he found scans of documents with names he didn't recognize. Old addresses. A passport under a different name. It was the first hint that the woman he thought he knew might have been living a different life all along. In one moment, Alan lost his wife, his savings, and the future they had built together. The quiet life in the country was gone. All that remained was silence and questions with no answers. In the days following Marissa's disappearance, Alan drifted through his life like a ghost. He went through the motions, making coffee, unlocking the garage at work, changing oil filters, but nothing felt real. Every morning, he woke up hoping it had all been a dream, that she would walk through the door and laugh at how seriously he had taken a simple mistake. But every night ended the same way. The apartment still empty, the savings still gone. The police told him not to expect much. Adults were allowed to disappear. Unless there was evidence of a crime, there wasn't much they could do. She had left willingly, packed her things, and taken her own money. That was how they saw it. But Alan knew better. Or at least, he thought he did. He spent hours going over her things. Every drawer, every notebook, every sticky note left on the fridge. He replayed conversations in his head, trying to hear something he had missed. Had she said goodbye without actually saying the word? Were there signs he had ignored? A month before she vanished, she had asked him about getting their passports renewed. He hadn't thought much of it. He figured she was just being practical. But now, he wondered, had she been preparing to leave? Alan checked the bank records. Again. The transfer had been made online, just after midnight the night before she disappeared. The entire amount, $148,000, had been moved into an account with a different bank, one he'd never heard of. When he called that bank, they refused to give him any information. The account wasn't in his name. Privacy laws. The paper trail ended there. He checked their credit cards. Nothing unusual. No hotel bookings. No flights. He called the airlines anyway, then the bus companies, even Amtrak. No one by her name had traveled. He checked shelters, hospitals, jails. Nothing. It was like she had vanished into thin air. Desperate, he drove to her sister's house across town. They hadn't been close, but she was the only family Marissa had mentioned. Her sister answered the door looking confused and concerned. No, she hadn't heard from Marissa. No, she didn't know anything. They hadn't spoken in months. Alan didn't know whether to believe her. She offered him a glass of water and asked him to call if there was any news. He left feeling worse than when he arrived. After a week, the police stopped returning his calls. They said there were no signs of foul play. She had accessed the account using a shared password. She had every legal right to withdraw the money. From a legal perspective, it wasn't a crime. From Alan's perspective, it was a betrayal so deep he couldn't find words for it. He started driving around at night, aimlessly. Sometimes he thought he saw her, at a bus stop, in a coffee shop, walking across a crosswalk. But every time, he got closer. It wasn't her. Just someone with the same hair, or the same jacket, or the same shape of face in the shadows. He began to wonder if he was losing his mind. 2 weeks after she disappeared, he found something strange. He was cleaning out the closet, trying to make space, when he noticed the box where they kept their old photo albums. Inside was an envelope, plain, unmarked. He opened it. Inside were 5 passport-sized photos of Marissa, but with different hairstyles and slightly altered makeup. In some, she looked younger, in others, older. One of them was labeled Erin L. He stared at that name for a long time. Erin L. Not Marissa Clark, not even Marissa Hale, which he had discovered from some of her tax paperwork. Just Erin L. A name that didn't belong to the woman he married, but seemed to belong to the woman she really was. He took the photos to the police. They told him it didn't prove anything. Lots of people took different photos for IDs or job applications. Still no sign of a crime, still no reason to reopen the investigation. Alan walked out of the station holding those photos like pieces of broken glass. Unable to let it go, he hired a private investigator, a retired detective named Thomas Doyle. Doyle had worked missing persons cases for over 20 years. He listened to Alan's story without judgment and agreed to take the case. The first thing Doyle did was dig into Marissa's background. Within days, he confirmed what Alan had only started to suspect. Marissa Clark didn't exist before 2016. Her social security number was issued in a different name. Before Portland, she had lived in Arizona under the name Monica Hale. Before that, there were traces of someone named Rachel Dean in Colorado. All the names were linked by a pattern. Each one vanished after 4 or 5 years. New jobs, new addresses, new names. No criminal records, but always a man left behind, always. A large amount of money missing. The Arizona case was especially troubling. In 2013, a man filed a report claiming his girlfriend had emptied their joint business account and disappeared. The woman he described matched Marissa almost exactly. Same height, same eyes, same birthmark on her neck. No charges were ever filed. The police couldn't prove she had taken the money. She had vanished before they could question her. Doyle shared this with Alan, who could hardly breathe as he listened. The woman he loved wasn't just gone. She had done this before. She had made a life with someone else, built trust, made plans, and then taken everything. It was a pattern, a method. And now, it was Alan's turn. Alan spent nights staring at the ceiling, replaying their years together. He couldn't reconcile the woman in the photos with the one who used to curl up beside him on the couch, the woman who had once cried watching an adoption ad for rescue dogs, the woman who used to write little notes in his lunch, things like, "You've got this," and "One day closer to Idaho." Was any of it real? Or had it all been part of a game she played to get what she wanted? It was the quiet that got to him, the way the apartment echoed now. The empty fridge, the stillness. Every corner reminded him of a lie. Even the boxes she had packed for Idaho were gone. She had taken them with her, just enough to make it look like she was still planning their future. Just enough to keep him from suspecting a thing. Marissa Clark had disappeared. But now Alan wasn't sure she had ever truly existed at all. Alan kept the television on at night now, not to watch it, but to drown out the silence. It was the only way he could sleep. Even then, his dreams were haunted by flashes of Marissa, smiling, turning away, fading into a crowd. He'd wake in a cold sweat, unsure if he was mourning a person or just the life he thought they'd share. Every morning he woke with the same question: who had she really been? Thomas Doyle, the private investigator, didn't waste time. He had contacts, tools, and the kind of intuition that came from decades of chasing people who didn't want to be found. He started by digging deeper into the woman Alan knew as Marissa Clark. What he uncovered over the next few weeks turned confusion into something far darker. The name Marissa Clark had no records older than 2016, no high school, no college, no medical history, nothing that proved she existed before she met Alan. That alone was suspicious. Most people left digital footprints, social media accounts, utility bills, old addresses. But Marissa's trail just stopped. Using facial recognition software and public records, Doyle found older photos that matched her, different names, slightly different appearances, but the same woman. In 2013, she was Monica Hale in Phoenix, Arizona. In 2010, she went by Rachel Dean in a Denver suburb. In 2006, she had briefly worked under the name Lauren Bishop in Salt Lake City. Each identity lasted about 4 or 5 years. Then she vanished. Each time, she left behind a man, and in at least 2 of those cases, a sizable sum of money. One man, the Arizona boyfriend, had filed a complaint after their shared business account was emptied, $30,000 gone overnight. He reported it to the police, but there had been no evidence linking her to the crime. No proof of theft. The account was technically shared. She had legal access. The man never saw her again. Another case surfaced in Denver, where she'd been employed as a freelance graphic designer. She lived with a man who owned a small tech startup. When she left, the company's seed money, just over $50,000, was also missing. No charges were filed. The man refused to speak on the record, citing embarrassment. Doyle presented all of this to Alan in a folder full of grainy photos, timelines, and witness statements. Alan read through the documents slowly, as if absorbing each fact might make it less painful. But the truth couldn't be softened. The woman he married had a history of deception. She had made a career out of building lives just to walk away from them, richer each time. It was hard to say which was worse, the betrayal or the realization that he had never really known her. He remembered moments now with a new, chilling clarity. How she always avoided questions about her childhood. How she claimed to have no contact with her parents but never explained why. How she had a talent for making people feel special, seen, understood. It hadn't just been love, it had been strategy. But one thing didn't add up. All her previous disappearances involved tens of thousands. But with Alan, she took almost $150,000, far more than before. Doyle theorized that this might be her final con. Maybe she was done running. Maybe she had set her sights on one last big payout before disappearing for good. Still, they needed to find her. They checked airports, train stations, bus depots. Nothing. But then came a small break. A rental car agency in Seattle reported a woman matching Marissa's description using the name Erin Lawson. The rental was paid for in cash. The ID she used was a Washington state license. Realistic but fake. She had rented a compact car for 1 week, just 2 days after leaving Portland. Alan felt a flicker of hope. Doyle obtained the rental agreement and tracked the vehicle's GPS history. It had traveled north, crossed the border into Canada, and stopped for several days in a neighborhood outside Vancouver. The car was later found abandoned in a parking lot near a marina. No security footage, no trace of her. But the trail had led somewhere. A search of the area uncovered another alias, Stephanie Wells. A woman by that name had rented a small home there under a 6-month lease. The landlord described her as quiet, polite, and well-prepared. She had paid in advance, never caused trouble. But when he came by to collect the mail one day, the place was empty. She was gone. Inside, police found only a few belongings, some prepaid phones, clothing tags, and a notebook containing cryptic notes about South America. 2 countries were mentioned again and again, Chile and Uruguay. That shifted the investigation. Doyle reached out to contacts in immigration, passport control, and foreign consulates. But if she had left the continent, she'd likely done it under yet another identity. No travel records matched her known aliases. She had disappeared again. Possibly for good. Alan struggled with what to do next. The police still viewed the case as a civil matter. To them, she hadn't broken any laws. She took money from a joint account, didn't leave a note, and hadn't asked for help. It wasn't a crime to disappear. And even if they wanted to pursue her, international law made recovery difficult. She could live abroad under a new name, untouched by consequences. The most haunting realization came quietly. She might have been planning this for years. Every loving gesture, every future plan, every sacrifice, it could have all been calculated. Alan thought of the evenings they spent budgeting together, the long drives where they dreamed aloud about their farmhouse. Had she smiled because she believed in the dream? Or because she knew how easily it would be hers alone? Alan sometimes found himself rereading old texts from her, trying to find the truth between the lines. Her last message to him had been the night before she left. Tomorrow is the start of everything. At the time, he thought it was about Idaho. Now he knew it wasn't. Doyle kept looking, but the leads slowed down. Each clue led to another dead end. Marissa, or Monica, or Rachel, or Stephanie, was a ghost. She knew how to disappear, how to blend in, how to erase herself. Alan sat alone in their empty apartment, now stripped of warmth. The woman he had saved with, laughed with, loved without doubt. She had never existed. She was a collection of masks, each worn just long enough to get what she wanted. And now, she was gone. He had lost more than money. He had lost trust, identity, and the version of himself that believed in happy endings. Alan's world had shrunk to a narrow focus. Find Marissa, or rather the woman who had hidden behind that name. But as weeks turned into months, and months stretched toward a year, hope began to fade. The longer she stayed hidden, the more Alan realized that she wasn't just running from him, she was running from everyone. From a past layered in secrets, lies, and carefully crafted illusions. The private investigator, Thomas Doyle, had followed every lead, but the trail grew colder. With each new discovery, Alan wondered if he was chasing a shadow, a ghost woven out of deceit. He remembered the last address Doyle had uncovered, a rented home in Vancouver, Canada, under the name Stephanie Wells. The place was abandoned, but inside, the notebook, with references to South America, hinted that she had plans far beyond North America. Alan had always imagined their fresh start would be somewhere peaceful and quiet. A farm in Idaho, fresh air, hard work, and simple pleasures. But it seemed the woman he thought he knew had bigger, more complicated dreams. Dreams that required disappearing, reinvention, and leaving destruction behind. One night, Alan sat in the dark, scrolling through news articles about missing persons and fraud cases across the Americas. He noticed a pattern in some stories from small towns in Chile and Uruguay. Women fitting Marissa's description, always moving in, creating connections, and then vanishing with money. The cases were never linked, but the details were eerily similar. Alan shared this with Doyle, who became more determined. Doyle contacted a journalist based in Santiago, a reporter who specialized in tracking fugitives. She agreed to help, and soon sent Alan a brief video message. A woman matching Marissa's profile had been spotted in a small village near the Chilean coast. The sighting was recent, just a few weeks earlier. It was the first real proof that Marissa was alive. But it also raised a chilling question. How many new lives had she started? How many people had she left behind, alone and betrayed? And why had Alan been so blind? Alan's family and friends tried to support him, but they didn't understand. To them, it was a financial loss, a personal heartbreak. To Alan, it was the unraveling of everything he had believed about love, trust, and the future. Every memory felt tainted, every photo a reminder of lies. He began writing, not to find her, but to make sense of her, the woman he never really met. He wrote down everything he could remember, her mannerisms, her favorite songs, the books she loved. He noted the things she never talked about, the vague answers to direct questions, the small details that had seemed unimportant. Through writing, he tried to piece together the puzzle of a life that wasn't real. One evening, while sorting through a box of old letters, Alan found a package addressed to Marissa, but it was returned unopened. The sender's name was David, a man from a small town in Colorado. The letter inside was brief, pleading for answers. It spoke of betrayal, lost money, and a broken heart. It was dated 2 years before Alan met Marissa. Alan showed the I letter to Doyle. It confirmed what they suspected. This was not the first time she had disappeared with someone's money. But it also suggested that she might be trapped in a cycle, unable or unwilling to break free. As Doyle dug deeper, he uncovered a disturbing pattern. Marissa had been involved in identity theft and financial fraud in multiple states. Each new identity came with new documents, stolen or fabricated. She had a knack for erasing her tracks and disappearing before anyone could catch up. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Doyle couldn't find any criminal charges against her. She was too careful, always one step ahead. Police in each jurisdiction had closed their cases, labeling them as civil disputes or voluntary disappearances. It was frustrating for Alan, who wanted justice as much as answers. Alan's own life began to unravel. The stress, the heartbreak, and the constant uncertainty took a toll. He struggled to trust people again, to believe in kindness or stability. He stopped making plans, stopped dreaming. The farmhouse in Idaho, once a symbol of hope, became a ghost that haunted him. Every day, he wondered if she was still out there, smiling, lying, starting again. One cold morning, Doyle called Alan with unexpected news. An anonymous tip had come in. Marissa was living under a new name in Uruguay, in a small coastal town called Punta del Diablo. She had been seen working at a hostel, blending in with travelers and locals. According to the tip, she kept to herself, but was always polite and careful. Alan's heart pounded as he listened. After all this time, after all the pain and betrayal, there was a chance to find her. But what would he do if he did? Would he confront her, demand answers, or simply watch her walk away again? Doyle arranged for a trusted contact to investigate. The contact sent photos and videos confirming Marissa's presence. She had aged slightly, but her eyes, the ones Alan remembered so well, were unmistakable. Alan stared at the images for hours. A storm of emotions inside him. Relief, anger, sadness, confusion. The woman who had vanished with their savings, with his trust, was alive and just beyond reach. He realized then that the story wasn't just about money. It was about identity. How one person could create so many versions of herself, each one crafted to escape the past and seize the future. It was about survival, and maybe even desperation. Alan didn't know what to do next. He wasn't sure if he wanted to confront her or finally let go. But he knew one thing. The woman he loved, the woman who vanished with their savings, had rewritten her story over and over, leaving others to pick up the pieces. The quiet life he had dreamed of was gone. In its place was a haunting question. How well do we really know the people we love? Alan sat alone in the dim light of his small apartment, the weight of the past months pressing down on him like a thick fog. He had followed every thread of Marissa's tangled story, chased shadows across borders, and sifted through a web of lies she had spun so carefully. Yet now, confronted with the truth that she was alive and somewhere far away, he felt a strange mixture of emotions, relief, anger, sorrow, and an unexpected sense of closure. The anonymous tip that placed Marissa in Punta del Diablo, Uruguay, was the final piece of a puzzle that had haunted him for over a year. Doyle's contact had confirmed her presence. Photos showed a woman with familiar eyes, working quietly in a hostel. The woman he had loved, who had promised a future and vanished with everything they had saved, was still out there. But this time, Alan realized that finding her might not bring the answers or justice he wanted. He thought back to the many lives she had lived, the different names, the stolen money, the broken men left behind. Each time she had disappeared without a trace, erasing herself and moving on. It was a pattern so cold and calculated that it seemed impossible to understand. Was she running from something? Or simply chasing freedom in the only way she knew? Alan's friends urged him to move on, to rebuild his life without her. But it wasn't that simple. She hadn't just taken money, she had taken the future they had dreamed about together. She had taken his trust, his belief in love, and replaced it with doubt. Every day was a reminder of the woman who had been both a stranger and the center of his world. With Doyle's help, Alan began to consider his options. Confronting Marissa could mean reopening old wounds, facing denial or anger, and risking even more pain. Or he could let her go, accept the life she had chosen, and try to heal on his own terms. It was a choice he wasn't sure he was ready to make. Days passed with little progress until Alan received a message from the journalist in Chile. She had tracked down people in Punta del Diablo who remembered a woman matching Marissa's description. She was known to keep to herself, never sharing much about her past, but she was kind to the hostel guests and helped with the bookkeeping. Some locals whispered that she was running from something, but no one knew what. The journalist suggested that if Alan wanted to find Marissa, he would have to go there himself. Seeing the place, meeting people who knew her, maybe even speaking to her face to face. It was a daunting thought. After all, she had disappeared once before. Could she vanish again? Alan debated whether to take the trip. The idea of traveling to a remote town in another country, facing the woman who had changed his life forever, terrified him. But he also felt a growing need to confront the reality of her absence, to understand what had driven her away and what she had become. When he finally booked the flight, it was with a mixture of hope and dread. The journey felt symbolic, a way to close the chapter that had defined the darkest time in his life. He packed light, taking only what he needed, and the folder of documents Doyle had compiled. He told no one where he was going, wanting to keep the experience private. Punta del Diablo was a quiet town, a mix of sandy beaches, small shops, and winding streets. Alan arrived just as the sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the ocean. The town seemed peaceful, almost untouched by the chaos that had filled his mind. But beneath the calm surface, he knew there were secrets. Secrets Marissa carried with her. At the hostel, Alan introduced himself as a traveler interested in the town's history. The owner was friendly, welcoming, and spoke of the woman he sought with a mixture of respect and sympathy. Marissa had left the previous week, he said, quietly moving on like she always did. Alan asked if he could see her room. It was small but tidy, filled with books, notebooks, and photos, some of them torn or folded, others carefully placed in a drawer. He found a notebook with handwritten notes, mostly in Spanish, about places to visit, phone numbers, and cryptic references to a man named Javier. The room told a story of a woman trying to rebuild but always looking over her shoulder. Alan realized that Marissa wasn't just running from her past. She was searching for something she had lost long ago. He spent the next days walking the town, speaking to locals who had seen her. Some described her as kind but distant. Others said she was secretive, unwilling to share her story. No one knew why she left, only that she disappeared without warning. Alan felt a mix of frustration and sadness. The woman who had vanished with their savings was still an enigma, a puzzle he couldn't solve. But he also felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time, he saw her as more than a thief or a liar. She was a person, flawed and human, running from pain in the only way she knew. Before leaving, Alan wrote a letter, not to Marissa, but to himself. He wrote about the betrayal, the heartbreak, the lessons learned. He wrote about the man he wanted to become, stronger, wiser, and free from the ghosts of the past. He left the letter in the room she had occupied, a silent message for a woman who might never read it. On the flight home, Alan looked out the window at the clouds below. The journey had changed him. He no longer saw Marissa as the woman who had stolen his money and vanished. Instead, he saw her as a complicated figure, a symbol of the risks we take when we trust, the pain of broken dreams, and the resilience of moving forward. Back home, Alan began to rebuild his life. He repaired relationships with friends and family, found a new job, and started volunteering at a local shelter. He still carried the scars of betrayal, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they became part of a story about survival, growth, and hope. The mystery of Marissa Clark remained unsolved. She was still out there somewhere, living a life shaped by secrets and shadows. But for Alan, the search was over. Not because he had found her, but because he had found himself. In the end, the woman who vanished with their savings had taught him an unexpected lesson. Sometimes, the people we lose are not just the ones who disappear, but the versions of ourselves we leave behind. And sometimes, the greatest courage is in learning to let go and start again.